To the seekers, readers and thinkers, Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Today's video or session or episode will be different. It will be different because it will be a bit academic, a bit, not more than that. It will be different but because it will be more structured, and it will be different because it will be discussing a topic or a person. So a lot of students, especially those who are vying for CSS, have asked about international relations. I have not formally studied international relations as such, though I have had a lot of interest in the international organizations. I have actually interned for UN for a very short period of time. When I was in Syracuse, I was studying public policy at Syracuse University, and one of our professors was the Undersecretary of Management for UN for a very long time. So kind of introduction to that. But besides that, I've been studying international relations from history perspective. Now, history is very important in studying any subject, but for international relations, it is must. It is must because whatever you are deciding for future is based on whatever has happened in the past. And whatever has happened in the past is, guess what? History. So you study history and you make policy, and your policy becomes what then international relations is. So today I have come with one person. I hope you recognize them. So it's written here also. It's Kissinger. So Henry Kissinger is a person whose impact has been phenomenal in last century, especially the second half of the last century, in which he was instrumental in shaping the policy of United States. He was instrumental in actually shaping the policy of so many countries around the world, especially those who are at the receiving end of the United States. And he has been instrumental in shaping the world order when he brought China into the fold, and when he has been involved in so many other diplomatic efforts in Vietnam as well as in the Middle East. So why Kissinger is important personally for me? Personally for me, Kissinger is important for three reasons. One, which I have already mentioned, that if you want to study international relations, the study of international relations is by and large about study of US, because US is in the center of all international relations. And if you want to study about US, number one, you have to study about someone who has shaped US policy. Now, presidents actually come and go, but the establishment is in the US is people like Kissinger. So their writings, their speakings, their sayings pretty much define what US policy has been. That is the one point. Second point is that if you are interested in international relations, you must be very much interested in how the world has shaped in last 50 years. So how the Cold War ended and how the new world order, so-called, has come into being, and how it is behaving, how the globalization came into being. Thirdly, and that is something which I would emphasize a lot, the life of Henry Kissinger is itself a subject of a great interest. Why? Because someone who was an immigrant, who was a refugee, became an academic, and from an academic he became a policy maker. That shift is common in US, but still he made it kind of so smooth, and yet he was so effective at that. And that really tells us about how we have divided the policy making in between hardcore compartments. But the policy making, or especially diplomacy, is a fluid thing. So I have come with two books. One is Henry Kissinger, which is written by Niall Ferguson. And if you know Niall Ferguson, he's a famous historian. He has written about empire, and especially he has been again called as someone who has been an someone who is an apologist for the empire. But he is also very phenomenal, very impactful. And second book is by Kissinger, and this really encapsulates all what Kissinger stands for in a very simple language. Kissinger has written a lot of books on China, diplomacy, and before that the first book on nuclear weapons. But this one is perhaps the last one, and this is so simple. This actually describes that why the world is what we see. And I have been also interested in Kissinger because no one has been hated in the field of international relations as Kissinger has been. So Kissinger is what? Kissinger has been called as a war criminal. He has been called someone responsible for genocide. He has been called as someone who is responsible for supporting dictators. He has been called as someone who has been the most vocal as well as most active tool of US policy against actually democracies. And why? Because he actually is known for one word which is very important in international relations, and that is realism. So a realist in common sense is someone who stands for power, someone who stands for status quo, someone who is against rights, someone who is against even democracy, it has to be, and someone who is really interested in the acquisition of power and distribution of power for their own benefits. So we are now standing at a precipice that what should we do? Should we be realist or should we be idealist? But let's wait that. And let's see how Kissinger became a realist. So Niall Ferguson argues that before Kissinger became a realist, he was actually an idealist. And in 1968, late 68 and 69, he became formally part of the US government. He became the National Security Advisor, later became the Secretary of State. And then he became, let's say, notorious after that. But even before that, he was a pure academic and he was actually a realist. You will read this, and if you will read this, then you will have the full really range of what Kissinger was and what he stood for, and his impact we cannot really over exaggerate. For me, there are three things which are very particular to Kissinger, which I've been fascinated by that. One is his sense of history. So Kissinger actually did his PhD on Congress of Vienna, and he discussed the diplomacy of two great diplomats of 18th century. Those were Castlereagh from UK and Metternich from Vienna. And then I see him applying the historical lessons into the modern world. So nowadays there is a trend, there is a fashion that we will be discussing things like, we are discussing things like AI and social media, etc., etc. We think that we are detached from technology. We are detached from history. But actually we are what history has shaped us to be. So if we go to war, still the instincts are as if we are going to war in Greek times or Roman times or Napoleonic wars. Or if we are forming societies, this has been defined by how we have behaved in the last few centuries. So Kissinger's sense of history into international relations is really perhaps the first one, and it has a lot of impact personally for me. Secondly, what I have been really impressed in is Kissinger's approach toward decision making, policy making and analysis. He makes great points. His most interesting point which I came across was that he says that only academic has a luxury of making policy with full information. The policymaker, politician, statesman, they always have limited information. If they have full information, the policy might not be needed. This is a very nuanced point, by the way. So a policy has to be made in uncertainty, but yet it has to be consistent, it has to be logical, and it has to be practical. So his policy making, decision making approach is still unparalleled. His insights are really, really deep, and his approach is simple yet covers everything. The third thing which I found in Kissinger is how he transformed from an academic to a policy maker. So most of us who read books, they think that they are going to waste. But if you have a logical way of thinking, you can apply it on the real world, and you can be assisting in policy very soon. This thing has been very common in US, but in our part of the world perhaps not that much. But for policy or for even studying international relations, you need to have an analytical mind and a sense of history. That is the lesson from these two books. So these two books are about Kissinger and by Kissinger. So if you have any interest in international relations, recent history, world history, you should be reading these two books. See you soon. Take good care of yourself. Thank you very much.